Welcome back to Impactology Live. Our next speaker is Radek Sali. Radek Sali stands as one of Australia's most successful business people and a serial entrepreneur in the health and wellness sector. It's our absolute pleasure to welcome Radek Sali to Impactology Live as one of our guest speakers. Thank you, Radek, for making the time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Under Radek's leadership as CEO, the Swisse Wellness, it absolutely revolutionised the health and wellness sector, charting record sales, pioneering the use of brand ambassadors and leading an inspired high-performance culture that was the envy of the market. Radek is an inspiring and visionary leader who continues to make a significant impact in the health and wellness sector. And following the sale of Swisse Wellness, Radek established Light Warrior Group, investing in businesses that are socially responsible and environmentally conscious. So again, welcome to Impactology Live, Radek. I know that you and George go back a number of years, having both worked at Village. So what's the dirt that you can give us on George? When you knew a previous version of George, give us some goss.
Well, George is who he is. There's so much authenticity there, it's not funny. He's the most lovely man that you'll meet and incredibly talented at whatever he chooses to do. So I'm not surprised he's here running something like this, creating impact.
That's very lovely. I was hoping for something a little bit, juicier, but never mind. Before we jump into some questions, I just want to remind everybody that might be tuning into the live stream, you've got an opportunity to send through some questions and we will absolutely direct them through to Radek as we go along. So Radek, a little bit of background. Maybe let's start with your former years, no dirt of course. Who were your heroes growing up?
Well, my parents were my heroes to start out. I reckon we all pretty much start out that way. And then outwardly, it was a mixture of rock stars, movie stars, and Richard Branson. So, I think that it's interesting that when you look back on those that kind of inspired you, you kind of look at patterns in your life and you go, well, hang on, you're trying to emulate what they're doing, and later along the way, I learned a bit more about that kind of emulating your heroes and your the people you look up to through Anthony Robbins and the science behind that, and how important it is to mirror individuals that you respect and see them doing things that you would like to be doing. And so it doesn't surprise me that intuitively a lot of those personalities, like if I talk about the rock stars, it'd be Midnight Oil and Peter Garrett, and him singing about social issues, and that's sticking with me and always moving me, and to be 8 years old or 9 years old and that resonating is quite unique. So I think that it's really interesting to ask that question and think about those people that have influenced you.
Absolutely, and I think as we think about our own impact that we make, and obviously the people that we've got on, including your good self, are impactologists in their own right, but we all have a backstory and we all have somewhere where we came from and something that shaped us and shaped our impact. Now, of course, both of your parents spent their career in the medical field. Can you share with us how their influence shaped your passion in health and wellness?
Well, Mum and Dad are pretty unique. Dad, I'll start with Mum, because she's a medical scientist, but she would read blood for the levels of nutrition that was in the blood in Dad's chronically ill patients, and help Dad advise on the right type of nutrition for that patient to take, so they could be the healthiest they could be to treat whatever chronic symptoms they were experiencing. And so that's a bit different for a scientist that was a blood scientist to be looking into that element, a good 30 years ago. And then my father was one of the first person in Australia at least to talk about diet causing disease in conventional medical circles. And he was laughed at back in the 70s, and his work didn't get published until the 90s in British medical journals. So it was 20 years of trying to prove himself to his peers that what he was talking about makes sense. And now we kind of laugh at the fact that was laughed at, that you can eat whatever you like and it's not going to affect your health. My father and he both my mother and father still work to this day. Dad's 80, Mum's 70, and Dad works harder than I've ever worked as a CEO, still to this day. So he hasn't really stopped, and he's still continuing to trailblaze. So I have huge admiration for his life purpose in this area.
That is fantastic. What awesome role models that you've obviously had growing up. Now, we mentioned before that you started your career back at Village. How did you make the transition from that career through to health and wellness? Talk to us a little bit about that, how that occurred.
Good question. For me, when I started out at Village, I remember going for the job, and I was a uni student. I was coming out of school, and I actually got interviewed by the CEO of Village at the time, and I was really nervous. And he asked me at the end of the interview, so he goes, "You got the job. Which cinema centre do you want to work at?" And I said, "Forest Hill." He said, "That's a Hoyts." So I'm on the best foot. So I ended up at Doncaster Twin, which was the smallest set of cinemas at the time. But it was a wonderful first step, because being at uni, I quickly realised I was paying for my university education, but I was getting paid to come to work and work amongst my friends and people that were older than me, same age as me, or younger than me. And it quickly became an environment where I could learn on the job and refine my skills, and also learn pretty quickly that I couldn't be, for want of a better term, a dickhead about it. And as I started managing people, the same people that I was having a drink with on the kind of weekend, my friends, suddenly I was asking them to do something at work, and I'd have to do it in a way that, was inspiring connection with them and giving them purpose for why we went about upselling or making choc tops or cleaning the cinema. And so it was a great thing to refine and kind of build on my learnings. And so what quickly became apparent to me was that, this was the best university of life course I could be doing. And so I worked my way up through every opportunity that was presented to me at Village, which was a wonderful range of opportunities, working nationally and internationally, but never really ever worrying about the money I earned. And I guess I got that from my father. He always reinforced with, never worry about money, it will look after itself if you do the right thing. And so, for me, I've never been driven by finances, just been driven by experience. And as a result of that, opportunities continue to come. And sometimes if I look back on it, probably wasn't being remunerated correctly, but overall it's worked out pretty damn well. And so that's why you shouldn't look at things in a short term. It's much better to look at the long term and look at the progression of how you achieve things. And the fact is that it's just long hours and long timeless hours and kind of a relentless pursuit of getting to a better place. And one should never forget that people aren't successful without a sense of doing everything it took to get there. There aren't really that many flukes in life, and so that period at Village for me was a 11-year university course that created the opportunity for me to go across to Swisse, and Swisse was a small organisation. It was turning about 13 million in revenue, and I was perfect for the role because I'd come from this big organisation where I'd worked multinationally in operations, the systems of a business, and Swisse had grown as far as it could have grown without good process and governance and structures and systems in place to take it forward. So it had all the foundations, had a great culture, some great leadership, some great shareholders, but it really needed to go to the next level. And so it turned out to be the perfect fit and something I'm very proud of. But now we've sold that business to a Hong Kong listed entity, and we're going to make the most of that and give back to this country and do more with it. So I'm really excited by the next chapter.
Rad, I echo your sentiment around the experiences from Village Cinemas, and I was there for 10 years, and it was exactly that. It was about the sense of community and the people that we worked with there that made that whole experience not just good, but enabled us to build some skills that, frankly, I look back now and a lot of those raw foundational skills were honed, over the 10 years working operationally in head office. So yeah, certainly I look back on my time at Village in the way that you've just outlined it there. I just want to touch on your point around the Swisse journey and ultimately selling the business and being able to give back. So if I focus on today's topic of capitalism is good, we'd like to unpack this in a number of ways. So the first question we have for you is, what are you seeing that could suggest that the capitalism is good approach could work effectively?
Yeah, it's something I think about all the time, and something that I think holds really true is the fact we live in a pretty extraordinary society. Australia's a wonderful place, and that's been built off the back of capitalism. And the thing around capitalism is that capitalism in partnership with democracy seems to be the most favourable societal, political kind of match for people to feel happy. And if you look around the world, it's worked pretty well when those two have worked hand in hand. We see examples. I mean, and I suppose the biggest threat to that at the moment is capitalism alongside communism or a dictatorship, and so that's the other successful kind of measure that we're seeing, which is another big economy in China, and so when I sort of compare the two, I like what we're producing here, and like China goes about looking after its kind of how people view its way of leadership and the way it runs its country. I think we need to be just as proud in what we do. And part of the beauty of it is to have open criticism, which is fantastic. But we also need to talk about all the things that are great about it and probably talk about that a whole lot more. And we need our governments supporting this notion and rewarding businesses that are doing, making the most of creating great workplace environments. And this is where I think that every one of us can have an impact in our workplace by being part of a great workplace culture. And where this really struck me is whenever we had someone start at Swisse, it would happen in the majority of cases, their husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend would say to me, "Wow, my partner is a completely different person as a result of working at Swisse. They are so much happier." Now, if you think about everyone's workplace, and if they were like that, if everyone was so much happier, how much happier would our society be? So our job as leaders is to create purpose in organisations, to to harness capitalism and make sure we use it for good, and we contribute to society. And I would argue that governments should be incentivising companies with tax incentives to provide for better workplaces, because ultimately what are governments here to do? Keep the people happy. and so why don't they use business, which is 4 out of 5 of us work in capitalist or business organisations, not for the government, 1 out of 5 do. Why don't they use that arm to incentivise them, like we incentivise our team members with financial incentives? And I'm just sick of hearing governments talk about the financials. We should be talking about these other indexes, the happiness indexes, the culture indexes, how we're making this bigger. And this is how we'll get a handle of mental health and get in ahead of all these issues that seem to be spiralling out of control for us. So, but the way we're going to get there is more businesses and more leaders realising that responsibility and showing that you can be extraordinarily successful as a result of having that focus on purpose as an organisation.
And Rad, if I can just extend on what you're sharing there as well, you developed a high performance culture at Swisse when you were there. So then the question on that, rather than just looking at the financial metrics, looking at something a little more tangible in respect to culture and wellness, what role does company culture play in the capitalism is good equation for you?
Well, it's one thing that can't be copied. That's the wonderful thing about culture. And that was our secret weapon at Swisse. Everyone could see our marketing, see our products. And in fact, you could copy the ingredients you put in our products, because as a therapeutic product, you have to list exactly what was in it and the dosage of it. So we really didn't hold anything from a patent point of view or a point of difference point of view. And so all of that was pretty open. But the culture just couldn't be copied. And I looked at our competitor, and they did exactly the same thing as us. And whilst we paid all of our people in the top 25 percentile, and so they're very well remunerated, when I compared our efficiency to Blackmores or other players in industry, we had up to a half or a third, 2/3 less people doing the same job. And we had efficiency. We didn't have bureaucracy. We had people focused on doing their job and getting on with it, and feeling great about it. And to the point where many times over, we were a best employer. Culture was our asset that we would manage as closely as our business plan. It was as important as that. And we got results as a result of that. So this whole notion of creating this great culture and people being happier, and then that feeding into society is where we can all start. And then now how we think about it is we've got a fund. It's an impact fund, and that's focused on, and where I see the big opportunity, we see the big opportunity is in superannuation. We're the fourth largest sovereign wealth fund with our pension fund with superannuation in the world, and we're nowhere near that size of nation. So there's a massive impact that could be unlocked there, and so that $3 trillion, we want to put that $3 trillion to action for good. And I want to be able to look at my superannuation statement, and where you tick your boxes to your high risk, low risk, medium risk. I want to be able to tick impact and doing things with social purpose. And so we've created a fund that's doing this, and it's flying along and has a massive amount of interest, and it's diversified. It's across things like disability housing, solar. It keeps people in jobs with social bonds, people that have been long-term unemployed, through mentoring programs. We've got affordable housing, affordable aged care, all of these things, and I'm sure I've missed a few, and we keep diversifying as well. These are things that where capitalism is giving back and making society better, but also providing a return. And I think that we should be focused on that discipline of what capitalism is about is getting a financial return, which is great, to make things sustainable. But we should be looking at all of the things, not just the one notion of just the numbers. It's the whole position. Hence, creating purpose, and hence creating a capitalism with a purpose is a much better mandate.
Brad, can you share with us the underlying principle around effective impact investing? You obviously shared some specific examples of how to redivert funds for social good, but personally, what's your sort of core philosophy that underpins all this?
Well, I think that ultimately you have to separate yourself from being a philanthropic organisation. Which that's great, and there's plenty of room for those sorts of organisations, and I'm involved with many of them. It's a different beast. But when you're talking about creating impact through your kind of investment, you need to make sure that you're delivering returns that are similar to returns that will be got from ordinary investing without impact. And so that becomes an interesting mandate, and so we've got the best of people together to make sure that we look at things with that lens. So we're delivering 7 to 12% return, and that return has actually been very favourable and held up through these very uncertain times, which again for the longer term will make it a more attractive prospect. But the other thing is too that the partners we work with, where we might be providing affordable housing, is we need to have people that are real and don't just look at the one individual situation. And if they're not going to be able to pay their rent, we're not just going to flick that person and not care about that individual. So we need to accrue for that and make sure we do look after people in circumstance and help them through what could be a difficult period. And people that invest with us expect that is our mandate. And that's probably why we've been so successful, because we do stand out to these philanthropic organisations that we partner with to create these investment opportunities, in the fact that we go beyond just the numbers. It's a deep relationship where we are very, very focused on what we're actually doing and the outcomes that individuals gain as a result of whatever service we provide.
And that narrative around that you highlight, the narrative, the traditional narrative, which is to do good doesn't necessarily you need to be good. And I think what we're talking about here is that you can still do really good and succeed in financially as well. The pandemic at the moment has challenged so many industries and so many organisations. What's the greatest lesson for you that you've taken away from this experience in the last 6-7 months?
Anything can happen, eh?
Yeah.
And we've had business. We've had 20 restaurants, so we've had to close. So that was really sad and difficult. I'm chairman of Food and Wine Victoria, and we had on the eve of our festival, the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival, we were unable to run the festival. So that was really challenging. But, an example of that organisation, we've come out of it stronger and more focused than we ever have been, and have delivered on a goal that probably, we've kind of fast forward rather than, it being a 3-year plan to become a digital content provider. We are now firmly that, and providing wonderful content on a 24/7 basis, which is really exciting, and it's diversified how we go about doing what we do. Things just take longer as well. Whilst certain aspects of businesses have been fast-tracked, but this method of communication is a tool. I like to think of the phone as a tool to communicate. I like to think that email is, and also Zoom is, or Microsoft Teams, and they are tools, but they'll never replace that human interaction. And so I think that we can utilise this way of communicating for a certain period of time, but it'll be interesting to see how that recalibrates. I think it'll be a much bigger feature, like email is now a much bigger feature of our lives when it first came along. Now I think this video conferencing thing, which I was already doing 2 days a week from my farm, it will become a much bigger feature for so many more. And that trip to Sydney that we might well have done, we'll be rethinking and perhaps visiting less. But I don't think it will replace it entirely. But definitely it's become the norm, hasn't it?
Radek, earlier on you talked about government, and you talked about the proportion of individuals that work for private enterprise versus those that work for government, and by far the majority of Australians do work in some kind of private or publicly listed enterprise as opposed to government. However, the question is more around, from your perspective as an entrepreneur and business person, how do you think that governments and private enterprise could actually work more effectively together to achieve some of what you spoke about earlier?
Yeah, so I'm always playing around with that notion of how organisations from different walks of life, I probably think about it more from the philanthropic point of view with social cause, and then how you infuse philanthropic organisations alongside corporate organisations to create purpose in them that are otherwise struggling to find a reason for why they do what they do. And so by bringing those two things together, you start to get this kind of natural creation of purpose by interacting, deeper goals that are beyond just whatever that company may well be doing. So that's one thing we play around. But with governments, I think that the strangest thing about government, I think though and this is where capitalism is being challenged and democracy is being challenged. It's the last bastion really of how it is. It's the last bastion where everyone's wearing a tie and a suit to work. It's the last bastion where it's okay to yell at each other at work and absolutely blow up. It's the last bastion where it's okay to not take blame or accept that you've done something wrong and call it out from the moment it happens. And so we're going to become better as a result of that. So there's a lot of deflecting that goes on. So I think that people are becoming less tolerant of that. We're expecting more, but it'll be a change that will take time. But I think we'll see it in our lifetime. And once that change happens, we're going to have a pretty extraordinary system in place.
Brad, a question has just come through from the social media feeds, and I'll paraphrase the question because it's a long one, but essentially the question is, if profits are driving innovation, capitalism is good and capitalism drives profits, what areas should we be focusing on from a business interest perspective to ensure that we are moving ahead with innovation? This has been debated in Australia now for quite some time. There have been various reports and studies that say that we could be a lot more innovative than maybe we currently are, and we ought to be perhaps a lot more innovative given the resources that we have. What's your view on that? And also, if we are to be more innovative in particular industries, which ones should we be more innovative in?
Yeah. Well, it's really sad what happened to Malcolm Turnbull because he ran a whole campaign on innovation and trying to turn our country into a more productive economy. And he almost lost that election, and his party really never forgave him for that. So innovation, unfortunately, has become a little bit of a dirty word amongst politics because of that, and they have long memories when things don't go to plan. But that said, fundamentally, you can see that we're rejecting that as people. And Australia is becoming a far more innovative economy and culture, and just the amount of startups, the ideas that have been generated, the sophistication of them have certainly changed. And what I see in hubs and universities and the work that's going on in how we've had to innovate to be an education powerhouse and relevant globally has really given me faith that we're going to get there anyway, and the politics of it will sort itself out over time. But yeah, that's our point of difference. We if you look around this country at the moment, we've got a workers shortage on areas that aren't particularly innovative roles. It's fruit picking, it's working front of house in hospitality. And so they've been traditionally filled by backpackers and so forth, and we don't have that at the moment. And you hear of harvest crops, losing a third of them, and so that says something about our economy and our people, is that they don't want to do those sorts of roles. So unless we innovate to work out a way to deal with those roles or move forward, we're going to be in a pretty challenging situation. But I have a true belief that we are on the right track in that regard.
I'm going to throw a question that perhaps might be a little bit political, but I'll throw it over anyway. And I think my view on what you've just said, and I absolutely agree with it, by the way, I think that the innovation debate in this country, and perhaps this was part of Turnbull's demise, who knows, I think there are other factors at play. However, I think in terms of innovation, as a society, there's a lot of fear. With innovation, there comes new ideas. And let's face it, people aren't always prepared to move to those new ideas. They're scared sometimes about change, but also what they lose in the process of moving to something new. So perhaps, there could be a way, and I think people like yourself are well placed to do this, around creating those linkages between, politics and business to reduce the fear and to help people understand, in a deeper way, what innovation can bring, as opposed to being worried and scared about it. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree, and it's a great observation. The great challenge is that, unfortunately, with the way social media is set up, which is now our mainstream media, it is designed in a way, and I've had this explained to me by the former chief ethicist of Google, and he explained YouTube in a way that was, when we're driving in a car and we're in the freeway and you suddenly notice that it's got traffic on both sides. And so there's been a car accident on one side of the freeway. It should be affecting the other side. But what happens is we naturally slow down to look at the car crash. And so this is what YouTube does to us. It naturally throws up car crash scenarios to capture our attention and hold our attention. And it's the same thing in Facebook, same thing in Instagram. And so this is the great challenge, is that unless you're extreme in your view, you don't capture as much attention. And so we're getting these extremes left and extreme right, and the sensible conversation, and those of us who are prepared to be flexible with our views, not just left or right, what actually makes sense for that situation, it seems to have got forgotten. And I have these same conversations with politicians, and we talk about this stuff, and yes, there is a role for us to reinforce that we want to go forward. And yes, let's take a simple one, which should be simple, and it's not, because it's politicized, is the climate change conversation. We just cannot continue to live like we're living. And that's okay. Let's change. And companies want to change. The biggest emitter in this country is BHP. They are going to carbon neutral 2050. I've spoken with Mike Henry about this, and he sees it as an opportunity. It's a business opportunity. And that's how our government should be seeing it. This is a major business opportunity. And yes, there'll be challenges around those that have worked in coal, but you could say that about taxi drivers and Uber. And, it's just change and evolution. And industries have always been under challenge. And look, we probably have more of a capacity, and this is the exciting thing about where we're at. It's not like back in the horse and cart days when the horse and cart got replaced by the car. There wouldn't have been any government intervention. Now we can do something about it, and we can retrain these people and find them other roles, or place the replacement energy offerings in these areas, so those jobs go to these people. But it needs to get away from a political conversation. It needs to be a sensible conversation.
And I think what it highlights what you're saying there is that in where things change, let's look for the opportunity as opposed to running from it. And if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that gin distilleries can make hand sanitizer, for goodness sake, and coffee beans can be turned into hand sanitizer and all sorts of things. And that is industry and organisations saying we're not going to let this get us down. We're actually going to use the opportunity to do something else with it. And so I completely agree there with your sentiments.
But our hand was forced during the current pandemic. The question is, how do we not revert back to type? So how do we use this momentum around focusing on future change, future innovation, and ensuring that is built into the DNA of leaders tomorrow? Forget about organisations. It's about getting that into the DNA of leaders.
And it's spot on. Let's not let a pandemic be the catalyst for change. Let's be looking at it. And I guess those innovative opportunities, I couldn't agree with you more. So it's no surprise, therefore, that the next question is around entrepreneurs and seeking opportunities. But in particular, what advice, Radek, can you share for entrepreneurs who are seeking the capitalism for good path?
Well, I think that if you're doing stuff with purpose, just gives you so much more meaning to life, and it does. As I said, as I've used examples, creating purpose could be around culture. So it's not just about things where you might be creating affordable housing or solar alternatives. You're creating you're taking responsibility as a leader to make a difference to people's lives and make them feel great about their experience in working with you. And that was the thing that would keep me up at night is how people felt about coming into work. And the reason being is that you can't do everything. And I know that if I'm in a much better state and feel good about what I'm doing, I'm going to do a whole lot better. And we all know that. That all makes sense. So why don't we worry about that as leaders? And as an entrepreneur, that is the thing you should be worried about, is how people feel in working for you. And if you think about all those kind of big tech startups that have done extraordinarily well, they've had leaders that have been pretty open and honest about where they're at, and open and honest when they've got things wrong, but also pretty focused when they know they're getting something right, and also prepared to ask their team about what they thought of them. And that's something we should all think about as entrepreneurs, is just being that kind of authentic self. And I go back to that example of when I started at Village, being that same person that you might have a drink with on the weekend in the workplace. So you're authentic. There isn't room for you to say that what you do is just for your family. No, that's not accepted anymore. It probably was 30 years ago that you could say this. I work for my family, and what I do at work doesn't matter. And that's why they were probably suiting up back then, because you have to be a different person to what you were at home. And that's all changed. And that's why I say this last dinosaur is the government, because they're still getting into suits and being someone different to how they are at home. I'm sure they're not like that at home, a lot of them. So this is what I say to entrepreneurs, is be your authentic self, so you can save all your energy for doing the most important things in your business rather than wasting it on trying to be something you're not.
In terms of sticking with the theme of entrepreneurs, I think many of them, as they start out, or if you start out in your business, it's always valuable to have mentors and coaches that can guide you along the way. What have been the best lessons that you have learnt in life from your mentors and coaches? And now equally, what's the one piece of advice that you consistently give to others?
I think I think that it depends on the stage of where you're at. So there's some extraordinary lessons I learned at Village Roadshow about just putting in and making sure I did everything I can and never left anything behind that I would regret in terms of not doing something or moving at a pace that was with authority and collaborative as I could have been, and then. Learning a bit about culture too then, and I had some great mentors in culture and just my early understanding of why culture was important and seeing results as a result of people being driven by purpose. To considering your words and the way we are to each other. I always love the example of, if you go to a gym and your personal trainer says 10 push-ups and we've all been to a personal trainer or had someone coach us in one regard. And if they've said to us, after that, 3 push-ups and you look tired today, you get through this. Now, that's how a lot of people's workplaces are. And so this emphasis on language and the importance of language that we choose in the workplace was something I learned at Swisse. And I had an amazing business partner who was managing director when I first started there and worked alongside me right throughout. And he was really big on this language thing that contributed to culture. And we didn't have words like problem, we had challenge. And instead of I would say we, because the team, and when something didn't go to plan, it was learn, grow, improve, rather than saying something's gone wrong. And now this next stage, I look at, I'm in a privileged position where I've sold my business and done extraordinarily well. And now I've got to give back. I've got to make sure that I make a massive impact with what I've done. I've sold to an international company, and I've got to make Australia better as a result of what's happened. And so that drives me every day. And I've been lucky enough to meet Richard Branson now and spend a significant amount of time. We share an investment together, and the way he lives his life and the way he chooses to give so much back through the elders or the B team. And Virgin Unite, it's just extraordinary, so inspirational. So if I can do a tenth of what he's done, I'd be so chuffed.
I love that clarity of purpose that you talk about there, Radek, with what you're now channeling your energy into, and that it has plenty of impact without a doubt. One final question before we move into some more fun questions, and I'm going to leave that to George. But we would like to know, given your health and wellness background, what are some of the core rituals that you incorporate as part of your daily practice to keep you on your game?
Well, I meditate every day, and so I ask people if they brush their teeth or they have a shower every day. So, what do you do for your mind? So make sure you take some time for your mind. And it does seem ridiculous if we don't, when we ask those sorts of questions, because our mind is the thing we use most day to day. And find the meditation that works for you. It took me many years, and I'd been exposed to meditation. Fortunately, as a young child, really young kid, I'd do Japanese ink brush painting as a 5-year-old, and would do a meditation through that. But I really didn't find one that worked for me until 8 years ago. Every day, something I could comfortably, and you should look forward to meditation. And so meditation, I do yoga 3 times a week, which has been a revolution. I can move, and I go to the gym 5 times a week, and that keeps me fit. And I play a bit of golf for not the game, just to walk around outside amongst nature and with friends. And of course, I take some supplements still. So. And then this little gadget's been fun. I just got this recently. It's Aura Ring, so it's very addictive. The guys, Mark Zuckerberg's an investor in it, you can tell, because you just keep going back to it like Facebook, and that sort of tells you my goals for the day and whether I've rested enough and my sleep pattern. We've got a 2-year-old, so my sleep's not in really great shape.
Completely understand. Oh, that is awesome. Well, that's good. We've heard meditation a little bit through the course of today, so it's lovely to hear someone else's experience with that.
Rad, can you just share the name of the ring, just so we can put it on our social feed for...
Aura. So OURA is the...
Perfect.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, Rad, we started a tradition 8 a.m. this morning, so we're well into it now. And we've got a series of questions that we ask our guests. And the first question we ask all our guests at the end of the conversation is, if you're on a video call with your 18-year-old self, what advice would you provide young Radek?
Where do I start? I think number one is just be kind to yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself.
Yeah. Well, Rad, that's the 4th time we've heard that today, so it's a consistent theme. And then finally, we've got a game of word association. So you know the drill. I'll say a word or two, and we'll hear the first word that comes into mind for you. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Cinema industry.
A lot of fun.
Health.
Endless pursuit.
Australia.
One of the best places in the world.
Family.
Long love.
Hawthorn Footy Club.
It's funny you say that after family.
Yes, that's why.
Pretty close.
Okay. Richmond Footy Club.
Very good.
Networking.
Essential.
The future.
Really exciting.
Radek, thank you so much for making the time today. The whole purpose of Impactology is to connect inspiring people with people that want to be inspired and be better people. And this conversation has certainly thoroughly enjoyed it, and we've got absolutely no doubt that everyone joining us today will be taking words of wisdom from your chat. So thank you so much. Do take care, and we'll see you soon.
Very kind. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Take care.
Radek.
Cheers.
See you later.
Wonderful. So we've got, it's 15 minutes until our next presentation, and it is going to be Paul Harrison from Zip Digital and Magic Hand Car Wash. So it's going to be a great discussion. If you're a digital marketer or just curious about how to grow your business, join us in about 15 minutes. We'll see you soon. Cheers.